to it.
Perfect. Well, to start off our first session in leadership, we will be hearing from Lucia Kanter St. Amour. Lucia Kanter St. Amour is a Harvard Law certified mediator and has been practicing law since 1998. For 10 years, she held the regular clinical teaching positions in mediation and negotiation at UC Hastings and UC Berkeley Law. She has lectured many prominent universities in the US and in Europe, and served for several years as a competition judge and mediator for the International Chamber of Commerce in Paris, France. In 2022, she launched her podcast, Forces of Good, the Superpower of Everyday Negotiation, with a companion book releasing in the fall 2022. Lucia is a VP of Board of Directors of United Nations Women San Francisco chapter and the founder and executive director of Spectrum Strategies, a 501c3 nonprofit for families with kids with special needs. Studies 6 languages, pianist, golfer, and cook of a really legitimate Italian cuisine. She lives with her family in the San Francisco Bay Area. We are thrilled to have Lucia join us today to teach the first steps in finding our superpower of everyday negotiation to help more women and girls think of themselves as negotiators. Thank you, Lucia.
Well, you're most welcome. It's always entertaining to hear oneself being introduced because you're like, really? That's me? All right, first of all, I'm so tickled to be here. Second, you do not need to take notes. Let it wash over you. All of this and then some is in my super snack-sized book releasing in a couple of months. Okay, how many times have you been in a conversation where the other person repeats themselves over and over again like a playlist on a free Spotify plan? I can't see any of you, but I have a feeling there's some heads nodding right now. Why do you think that happens? Great news. You can do something about it because what's happening is that person doesn't feel heard. And by practicing the technique I'm about to teach you, wow, talk about a superpower. And I'm going to relate it all to how it relates to negotiation too. So listening is truly the quiet superpower of everyday negotiation. Like everything else, it takes practice. If you don't practice, you're probably not really listening. Now, when I taught a listening module to my law students, I would ask each class for a show of hands. How many of them had been told when they were a kid that they'd make a great lawyer someday because they were a good talker or arguer? Many hands would shoot into the air. Then I'd ask, how many were told they would make a great lawyer because they were a good listener? In 10 years, how many hands do you think were raised in response to that prompt? Someone can people type in the chat, Anna?
Yes, they can.
Okay, let's see some guesses in the chat. How many hands over 10 years? Law students who were told they make a great lawyer because they were a good listener. Can I see the chat or Q&A?
I think so.
Anybody? Anyone?
Well, my guess is 0.
Okay, well, you're kind of a spoiler. You're right, not a single hand. So while the list of key negotiation skills is a robust list, if I were pressed to pick one above all others, I would single out listening, which is both terribly important and terribly underutilized. And you probably talk more than you think you do. Harvard Program on Negotiation faculty member Dan Shapiro shared in an issue of the alumni newsletter an illuminating experience from a conference call. He thought he hadn't contributed much to the conversation, but this particular conference calling service provided data on how much time each person spoke. Shapiro was surprised to discover he had actually spoken about a third more than anyone else. And that's coming from a highly trained and practiced expert. So in the early 2000s, I learned a method for teaching listening that was developed by psychotherapist Judy McMurray, who granted permission to share her methodology far and wide. And I'm going to walk you through it, and then we'll actually see it in action. All right, next slide. So according to psychotherapists, 3 key traits of good listeners include being 1, non-judgmental, 2, sincere, meaning your insides match your outside, and 3, empathetic. Next slide, please. So what makes listening so important? Well, here's your handy little list. It establishes better understanding. It builds rapport, trust, and credibility. Okay, rapport, rapport, rapport. It never goes out of style. It contributes to information gathering, another very important aspect of negotiation. I mean, to negotiate a good deal, you need to know what the other side wants and needs. It shows respect. Also, if the other side doesn't feel heard, they may shut down, and then that inhibits information gathering. It can also buy you time, and you can use it as a stall tactic when you don't know what to say. So think about it this way. You're letting the burden of talking fall on them. And then it also triggers reciprocity. If you listen to them, it's much more likely that they're going to listen to you in reciprocity. Okay, next slide, please. Stephen Covey wrote in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, seek first to understand rather than seeking to be understood. Guess what? You already know how to do this, but haven't been practicing it. And the best part is, like your favorite versatile lip gloss, it's an utterly simple, absolutely analog, eminently portable device you can exploit at any given moment every day. Next slide, please. So now we're going to talk about 3 steps which create a loop. And we're going to spend a little time on this slide. And this is the model right here. Step 1, set an intention. An intention to do what? To pay attention. Now this step has 2 parts. Part A is choosing to listen. It's a choice. So instead of fading in and out, with a purpose of understanding what the other party is saying and what makes it important to them. This means being curious. And you're listening for 2 categories: words as content and emotion as content, also known as the meta message. Choosing to listen means managing distractions. So part B of setting the intention is paying attention. And what gets in the way of this? Noise. We're going to talk more about that in step 2. And I don't mean external ambient noise like sirens or a barking dog, but your internal noise, errands, work, a pinging phone and social media alerts, trying to remember the actor's name from that movie where they colonized Mars, or even just, oh, I'm getting hungry. Setting an intention is a very powerful anchor. If you don't set an intention to listen, you won't be listening effectively. You'll get bits and pieces. You might get most of what the speaker is sharing. You will not get all of it. So step 2 is managing your noise. Now, noise we're defining as anything that distracts you. So here are some common types of noise. Identification or projection, that's the me too. Advice, been there, done that, and here's what you need to do. The rescuer, or the kind of codependency, I'll save you, I'll fix it. Sympathy is a type of noise. Oh, how terrible. Having your own feelings and wanting to express them. Judgment, that's a big one, right? What a stupid thing to do. Or, I can't believe she's so upset over something like this. Authority, you're wrong and I know what's right. Wanting to set the speaker straight. Interrogation, attorneys are really good at this. Who did what to whom, when, and why? You ask the questions you think are important and control the conversation. The analyst, tell me about your childhood. The censor, TMI, la, 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 I don't want to hear this. The hummingbird, oh, I hope one of the kids remembered to walk the dog. It's racing or spooling thoughts about other things. So paying attention means A, tracking the speaker, and B, tracking yourself. You can't eliminate your noise, but you can learn to manage it. Notice the noise and then refocus your intention to listen. This is our loop. You will navigate this loop a few times while listening to someone, even just for 5 minutes. Set the intention, focus, notice noise creeping in, manage noise, reset the intention, and so on. When you pay attention, you're listening for 2 things. I mentioned this before, but I need to repeat it. Words as content, feelings as content. Consider feelings another category of facts. Noise pulls you away from their story and focuses on your story. So thinking about what you want to say next is an example of that. Okay, so here's an everyday super tip, and my book is full of these. I think there's 40 everyday super tips in there. Being quiet while you wait for your turn to talk is not the same as listening. Okay, step 3, reflect back. Now, my father once told me a story about a Jesuit priest. A Jesuit provincial, this is a leader in the order of Jesuits, was interviewing a subordinate priest for advancement in the order. The provincial thoughtfully listened to the priest for about 15 minutes as the priest summarized his loyalty to the faith, the community, his worthiness for advancement. As he spoke, the provincial smiled and nodded frequently. When the priest was finished speaking, the provincial declared, "I understand. Unfortunately, the decision is not to advance you at this time." The priest was confused. "But you were smiling and nodding while I spoke." The provincial replied, "I wanted you to feel you were being heard." Remaining quiet as the other person gushes, while you nod your head and then finally say, "I understand," is not really listening, at least not according to the tried and true protocol I'm teaching here. How do you know you understand? How do they know you understand? Maybe you misunderstood something. Maybe their thoughts aren't organized and they haven't expressed themselves accurately. You could each literally or figuratively be perceiving the situation in different languages, but similar enough to go undetected. An experienced Danish attorney and negotiator shared with me how similar but different in many important ways the Danish and Swedish languages are. He had been in several situations where each side of the negotiation thought they understood one another and had closed a deal, only to later realize they had divergent understandings of the deal. Could happen to you. Next slide, please. Okay, I get this a lot. What if I can't keep track of it all? Or I don't know what to say to reflect back. Don't panic. You almost can't do this wrong. If faced with a full tilt speaker who doesn't allow for pauses and natural reflection points, just let that little steel ball dart around the pinball machine. It won't go on indefinitely, and that's just what they need to do. Don't worry about remembering it all. When they do resurface from their altered state, and they will, reflect back the essence of what you heard, especially points and words that were repeated. Their gush will gradually ebb after each round of reflecting back, and then their verification or clarification and additional speaking. Now, I recall a carpool commute to a conference with a work colleague with whom I was friendly, but not especially close. And he was navigating a heart-wrenching personal ordeal and decided that my captive audience in a car was the perfect opportunity to unburden himself. And he spilled out his troubles to a degree that wasn't exactly proportionate to the scope of our relationship, but there we were huddled together in a Fiat 500 and tethered to traffic. I didn't know what to say. So I didn't say much of anything at all. Now, this differs from waiting quietly for my turn to talk. It's more like the stall tactic I mentioned previously. Other than managing my kind of censor TMI noise, it's an apt example of letting the burden of talking falling on the speaker. Once he finished his gush, is what I call it, he fell quiet for about 20 seconds, a silence I did not fill. Finally, he exhaled and announced, "Wow, you're a great listener. Thanks. It means a lot to me." I was like, "Oh, that worked." And then we listened to music for the rest of the trip. Now, while my carpool example doesn't conform with this listening protocol, it does demonstrate the power of silence and giving another person the space to freely express themselves, which can have a meaningful impact in everyday negotiation. Next slide, please. So the job of a skilled listener could be described as helping the talker talk. By reflecting back, that is, summarizing both content and emotions, you accomplish a few things. Empathy. This is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. Clarification. No, that's not quite what I meant. What I meant was, then they clarify it. Verification. Yes, that's right. You got it. Encouragement, which then gets you more information. De-escalation. It also slows down the excretion of cortisol in the speaker's brain. And cortisol is a stress hormone that the brain cranks out and can really derail things. And it also means when the executive functioning of the brain has stopped, and now you're more at the sort of this limbic level amygdala hijack of the brain. Now, it's okay if you reflect back and you get it wrong. For one thing, you're already showing the speaker that you're listening. Also, reflecting helps them be more clear in communicating, and it's an opportunity for them to clarify. Okay, that's what reflecting back does. You either get verification or clarification. So it doesn't even matter if you get it wrong. Now, notice what is not included in this 3-step listening process, with one exception that I'm about to share. Does anyone notice it, or Anna, or anyone? Does anyone notice what's not in this?
I can't think of anything.
Is there any comments? No. Okay, it's this. Asking questions. Wanting to ask questions actually qualifies as a type of noise that distracts you from the speaker and requires you to reset your initial intention. But when it seems like the speaker is done, quote unquote, and after you've gone through a few cycles of reflecting back and getting clarification or verification, it's still not your turn to talk. You then ask what I call a super stealth question. Next slide, please. Super stealth question. Is there anything else? So often, this one little question, strategically posed at what seems like it may be the end of the listening and speaking cycle, reveals some rich little nugget that may have otherwise remained incognito. There's another super stealth question when it comes to negotiating in general, but you'd have to read my book to find out what that is. So think of your goal like this: to listen to that other person like they have never been listened to before. And you concede nothing by doing this. Understanding somebody does not mean you agree with them. So here's our recap. Set the intention to pay attention to content, words as content and feelings as content. Step 2, manage the noise. Step 3, reflect back, summarize their story, the facts, the emotions, the why the speaker cares. Like other negotiation skills, listening is not a superpower unless you practice and develop it. The 3-step technique might feel uncomfortable and come across awkwardly at first, So you might start off using this model with close friends and family. You can be transparent and say, hey, I went to this awesome summit and this negotiation expert talked about this method of listening and I'm trying it out. If you keep it up, you'll get so good at it, people won't notice that you're employing some technique. It will become natural to you. I have actually been in several negotiations in my legal career where I have demonstrated listening to the other party on the other side of the table better than their own attorney has. And guess what that made me? Anna, guess what that made me?
The most powerful person in the
The
room.
most powerful person in the room. Next slide, please. I'm reminded of this old proverb that points out we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and we should use them in that proportion. It's easier said than done, but it's doable and immensely potent. It all starts with setting the intention. Final slide, please. So you can learn more about this and other stealth everyday negotiation tips in my super snack-sized book and companion to my podcast, For the Forces of Good, the Superpower of Everyday Negotiation, releasing on October 1st publicly. You can also hear a demonstration of this listening model in episode 8 of the podcast. But we can do better than that, because with the time we have left in our session today, we're going to practice. So, Anna, did you decide who the speaker was going to be for me to listen to?
Yes, our assistant director, Chloe Thomas, I just brought her up as a panelist. She will be your volunteer today.
Okay, here's the instructions, Chloe, and there's instructions for our participants as well. Chloe, nice to meet you.
Should I stop sharing the screen?
If you like, sure. Your job is to talk about something real going on in your life that you're willing to share. And I'm going to listen to you. Be prepared to talk for maybe up to 5 minutes or so. I'm going to demonstrate the model, including the super stealth question. And then at a certain point, I'll say, okay, break roll. And then we're actually going to run through a debrief. Now, for participants, being an observer is not a passive role. You're going to be listening for words as content and emotions as content. And if you're on a computer of some sort, because you're on this webinar, so maybe you can open up your little notepad and even jot down words that are repeated, that Chloe repeats. That's one of the little exercises you can do. And that's pretty much it. That's what we're going to do. So, Chloe.
Hello, it's nice to meet you. And can you guys hear me all right? Great. Maybe this is going against the protocol, but could I ask you one question before we begin?
Well, you're not the listener, you're the talker, so you get to ask.
That's true, I can do anything I want.
I am not typing notes. People often ask me, well, can I take notes? What if I'm taking notes? That's kind of stylistic. I try to really practice this technique. For starters, I say, don't take notes, just really hone your listening skills. What I will often do is I'm listening, and then afterwards I'll jot down some notes. So just to let you know, I am not here secretly typing down notes about what Chloe is saying. So Chloe, what's your question?
Would it be beneficial to talk about something in my life that is more in the social realm, or like personal family stuff, or would it be beneficial for, since negotiation's on the mind, I've had a negotiation experience that I could also share too?
It doesn't matter. It could be anything. So
Okay.
whatever is sort of more on your mind, that you're just more anxious or eager to talk about that. It could be anything.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Oh my gosh, too broad of a spectrum. No. Well, maybe we'll do both. So if I were to begin, I'd probably start off by saying, just like listening to this panel, listening to you speak, I really find myself in a place of self-reflection, because I think about how I'm a question asker. I constantly ask questions, obviously, as I can have shown by example, but I always ask questions, and I wonder if that has maybe given my peers, my family, the people that I interact with on a day-to-day basis, or even an infrequent basis, this idea that I'm not listening to them as well as I could have. And when I was younger in high school, and I'm a junior year student at UCI, University of California, Irvine. And when I was in high school and I was still just figuring myself out, I always thought that I was a pretty good active listener, just because I felt like I could cancel out some of my noise. And only later on in my life did I realize that I have ADHD and I have a lot of noise. So it's not just in social situations, it's almost even in situations with myself, that I'm canceling out a lot of noise in order to be more functional in the present moment. So it's interesting thinking about all of these different ideas. It makes me wonder if I could have negotiated a new lease better. It makes me wonder if I could have made my family members, who I feel like I'm sort of losing a little bit of touch with. And I don't know if it's this like growing period of me being a young woman and developing my own opinions, my own political opinions, my own cultural opinions, that's just a normal clash, or if I haven't really been giving them the time and the attention to ground our relationships, if that makes any sense. Yeah,
it does make sense. And there's so much in there in what you just said already, because it sounds to me like you kind of identified as someone who was a good listener, and you thought of yourself that way.
Mm-hmm.
And then you became more aware of your own noise, and that perhaps you thought, maybe compared to the average, whatever that is, you had more noise than other people. And that this natural sense of curiosity you had about people that had you asking a lot of questions, which could also be related to the ADHD, there could be a correlation there, that maybe it was backfiring and they weren't feeling heard. And then you're now tying it to, you're sort of replaying these events in your life about your lease and your family relationships, and oh, could those have gone differently, and can they go differently as I move forward? Is that about right so far?
That is very about right, definitely. And I think I cherish that part of myself that I considered to be a decent and good listener, because I felt like it gave me stronger relationships in my life. And then, of course, with the transition to college, moving away from my hometown in San Francisco, and strangely enough, I don't know if it's just because because of maybe the pandemic, maybe the way that I fit into the climate of UCI, but I definitely feel like I connected those strong bonds with people that I could make very quickly to this idea that people around me brought opportunities, and I could bring opportunities to other people around me. But given all of these different factors and all these changes, and then sort of realizing that I have a lot of noise and to sort through and sift through in my own personal lives, rather than involving like this huge network and consistently sharing life with a lot of different people. Maybe that's a pandemic thing.
So now you're talking about, I think what you're talking about is how that little seed, that little nugget made you think about change. And then you're in each other transitions of your life. So starting going back to school, or starting school, I think you said you were a junior at UCI.
Yeah.
And so going back to school, okay, so transitioning from the family to school, and that
that's on my mind.
Pardon?
That's definitely on my mind, yes.
Right, so that's a cultural shift right there. But then you also talked about the pandemic and how that's a big change too. So that's a number 2 change. And then the number 3, I'm not doing this in order of how you said it, but then the number 3 change was this just this change in this awareness of yourself, where it's almost like I thought I kind of sensed you saying, like, I identified as a value proposition, that I was a good listener. And then I was thinking, oh, maybe that's not true. So there's all these shifts going on at once, like these tectonic plates.
Or maybe even less that it's not true that I can be a good listener, because I'm kind of an optimist, but more just the sense that there is space for that to grow. I think because I'm very extroverted, I'm very outspoken, I'm comfortable talking to people. I did theater in high school. And I think I took that for granted instead of growing it. That's probably what I was trying to clarify.
Okay, so you had this realization, and I mean, it sounds like maybe it at first sort of kind of took you by surprise and was discouraging. You're like, oh, am I not the person I thought I was? But then you were like, hold on, time out on the field. I don't have to let it discourage me. I can actually use this to grow. So you had that framework shift, that paradigm shift in your own mind. And gosh, you said something else about, being outgoing, having a background in theater. So that is maybe what contributes to the curiosity and I ask a lot of questions and I'm a good talker, and so then it's that idea of the balancing that outgoing part of you with but hold on, listen, be quiet and listen.
Yes.
That's the challenge, perhaps.
Yeah, that's probably my internal dialogue in terms of when I'm talking to most people. And it's not that I don't have the capacity to be an active listener. It's just that more like I have to tell myself, like it has to be a reminder to cancel out the noise of I am a talker, not just the extra noise of, everything. And I feel very fortunate too, because when I think about it, I'm like, just analyzing, like you said, replaying those different moments in which I could have grown my listening skills rather than use them as maybe a crutch, the ones that I already had. It makes me think of like how grateful and lucky I am to have so many good listeners in my life. And I'm like, it's inspiring. And at the same time, it's inspiring in the way that when you see an obstacle and you can overcome that obstacle, you still have to do it. You still have to will yourself, you have to gather your tools and get it together. And
so the awareness isn't enough. You actually have to then take action.
Yes.
And so you do have good listeners in your life, you say.
Very, I like to think so. Yeah, no, they are. They really are. I mean, I think it's probably on my mind because you're here, Anna, but when I even think about like how I became or key moments in my life, or some people call them like core memories. One of the strong ones I think about when I consider all of the important conversations that I've had as a young person are the conversations that I had with Anna when I first met her. It was a pretty amazing experience because we had just met. I was backpacking for 2 weeks and she joined for the last third week. So we backpacked for a week together. And I think thinking about myself as a listener doesn't necessarily have to be a discouraging thing. It's probably what my brain will initially bring up because I'm a human being, and it's like, oh, dang, you could have done better. But
that self-criticism.
Yeah.
You weren't good enough. You could have done better.
Yeah, but when I replay certain memories with people who are very important in my life, who have kind of created those core pieces of what I reflect back on and just good memories in my life, I think about conversations with like Anna, and I'm like, at the same time, I do think there's a beauty in learning it too. It's not just about the goal and the end game. Like when we first met, we were talking and talking and talking and talking and talking for like probably over 8 hours a day for a whole week. Maybe even like 10 or 12, something crazy like that. And I do think that, that's just me reminding myself that it's not necessarily just about the goal and not just about pushing yourself to the goal and over the mountain, over the obstacle, but also the way there.
So you're goal oriented. You said the word goal. I've counted, I think 5 times you said the word goal, and somebody else I hope is counting because I told you to do that. You're goal-oriented.
I'd like to think I am, but I do know that I am my harshest critic and probably don't reflect and give myself enough credit for the goals that I have achieved, and rather I focus on the future ones and just keep on going forward.
Oh, so the process is never over. You never arrive.
Yeah, no, it's like goal is probably the easiest word that could encapsulate what it actually is. And it sounds maybe a little bit cheesy to say, but I do try to remind myself that it is about the process and the journey there and the learning experience and the growth that it incites in me rather than the end destination. And I think that whole idea of goal-oriented end destination, I want to do this in my life, I want to get to this place, I want to graduate, and I want to be able to buy my mom a home in San Francisco someday, like all of those ideas I think are sort of external pressures that I do feel as a young woman with multiple different challenges and also skills in the life that I lead.
So it's not just your own personal goals. You're really in the back of your mind have this awareness of pressure that you want to provide for others and be a responsible family member and make sure they're taken care of.
Definitely. I think that's partially how I was raised, and it's partially just who I am, because it's not just my immediate like blood related family. I also feel that way towards the family that I've chosen in my life too.
Well, that kind of goes back to talking about the transitions earlier. You were saying about the shift from family to UCI. And so these are these different communities that you become a part of. And when you become a part of a community, you're in it. It sounds like you're really in it, and you're there to really connect and making it meaningful.
Yeah. I think that's, I mean, my initial response to that in my head that I'll be pretty blunt in sharing is like, why be a part of a community if you're not fully there? Why do it at all if your heart's not in it and your head's not in it and it isn't fulfilling for you and the people around you?
So you're not a box checker.
No, I have such a hard time getting through to-do lists. Yeah.
Because everything is of equal priority. Everything is, I don't know if I'm getting this right. If you're not a box checker, you have a hard time getting through to-do lists. Maybe it's because it's also important.
Yes, definitely. I think that I'm in a place where, like you said, and we've been talking about, I'm in a transitional phase, but if I'm being perfectly honest, I feel like I've been in a transitional phase for a lot of my life. I grew up low income, single mom, and we moved around a little bit, not a ton in comparison to other people, but we moved around significantly. And life was always survival mode, if that makes any sense. And I think that's kind of built me to be maybe a little bit desensitized to that transition in terms of actual events changing and shifting in my life.
It's like that's when you kick into gear, right? Oh, another change, another move. Oh, okay, this is how we survive this. We start bonding quickly.
Exactly. And then at the same time, I think there's part of my younger self that still craves a little bit more stability and, what's the right word? Maybe predictability even, but I was thinking something more like a sensation that's more concrete when in thinking about just our conversation overall, because you've been very accurate in terms of some of the things you're summarizing and reflecting back to me. I realized that I need to remind myself that I can be that concrete foundation for myself too.
You are your own foundation. Right. And then, gosh, I just blanked on what I was about to say.
Okay, we're wrapping a lot of things all up into one.
No, I know, but you were because you were talking about kind of survival technique, and then I said that's when you kick it into gear. But just that's how you create foundation. Like you do it immediately. Like you create your own security.
I like to think that makes me a flexible person, and at the same time, like I do recognize that I am a young adult and that sometimes I need to take a step back from that picture of being like creating. It's like making a painting. And when I draw and when I paint, I don't that often, but when I do, I'm like here with it. And I'm just so into it that I never take a step back and be like, oh, wait, I used the wrong color, or it looks different than I thought, or I totally neglected this area or that area. So it's, for me, it's like finding balance. It's not just bridging connections between transitions and communities. It's also about finding balance between the two, which is very difficult.
Difficult, and you're I don't know if you even realize you're doing this, but you're actually looping right back to the beginning.
I do. It's
we're talking about the art, and you're up so close to it, and then you step back and you're like, oh, I didn't realize it looked like that. And that's to me, it harkens back to the beginning when you talked about asking a lot of questions, and you love to ask questions, and then you finally realized, oh, wait a minute, is this kind of turning people off? Am I not being a good listener? And it's this perspective shift where you go, hold on, I'm now looking at it from a different perspective.
Yeah.
Let's think about this for a second, right? So is there anything else?
No, I think that was a really beautiful conversation. I almost wish I did take notes. I
think this is recorded, so
yeah, that's true. That is true. Thank you.
Because you're probably like, what did I even say? I don't even remember. So
I think it's fun to talk about.
As I'm going to go ahead and I should have let you go on with is there anything else more? But I'll go ahead and break the role play, and we're going to do our debriefing. And I would say for people who are writing down repetitive words, go ahead and just put those in the chat or the Q&A, whatever you have access to. Just go ahead and throw those in there so we can see what you noticed. And I want to start the debriefing by asking Chloe, who do you think has the harder job, the speaker or the listener?
I think definitely the listener, but maybe that's just my own personal bias. What would you think?
What about listening do you think makes it the harder job?
I think that when you give the responsibility to the talker to talk, there's almost, maybe this is just my perspective. When you give the responsibility to the talker to talk, it's almost as if you want to share share the sense of responsibility of being part of a conversation by increasing your listening skills or really trying to think back to what they were actually saying and canceling out your own noise. I find it harder to cancel out noise, just period, when you're listening rather than you're talking. But maybe that's just the way that I am.
Mm-hmm. And in general, what was that experience like for you?
The conversation.
Having someone listen to you the way I was listening.
It was nice. It was nice. Maybe I guess I really do have good listeners in my life, because I do feel like it wasn't too foreign of a sensation or too foreign of a conversation like I've never had before.
You know what's awesome about this?
Oh no, you cut out.
Negotiation. This listening model, it so neatly fits with the superhero like formula, which is the ordinary transformed into the extraordinary. This is very ordinary, and it is transformative in everyday conversations. And can you see how in a negotiation this could just make you a total badass? I mean, are you seeing that?
Yeah, I think so. I keep on thinking about that conversation with my building manager, and I'm like, I asked so many questions. Right. And what could I have listened to more?
Yeah, so there's a reason that when I was teaching the negotiation course at UC Hastings and UC Berkeley Law, the listening module was ordered before the questioning module. And there's a reason for that, okay? It's the seek first to understand rather than seeking to be understood. First, you listen, then you ask questions, okay? Because there's a whole other chapter on questions in the book and questioning and the use of questions and the types of questions and the timing of questions and the art of questions. And yeah, questions can put people be like, hey, am I being interrogated? Like, what are you trying to get out of me? What are you trying to, or what kind of commitments are you trying to get from me? So if you haven't built up that trust and rapport by demonstrating first demonstrating the listening, I think you're not going to get the most out of that interactions. That's why we started with what we said. This is the first step in thinking of yourselves as an everyday negotiator. And the reason why Anna and I thought this was so important to include in this summit is because I have personally met, I'm 51 years old. This is where you go, oh, Lucia, you don't look, you, anyway.
True.
I have met far too many women, well, we should say non-cisgender men, let's put it that way, that's better, who don't even know how to ask for something, much less think of themselves as negotiators. And Linda Babcock and Sarah Lashover, Lashover is her name. They wrote a book in 2003 called Women Don't Ask. And it's because they were noticing as graduate students at Princeton that the male graduate students were teaching their own courses and the women graduate students were not. They were getting admin jobs. And when they asked the dean said, well, the men ask, the women don't ask. So that's another first rule of negotiation. You don't get what you don't ask for. And a lot of women that I have met, they don't even know, they're like, oh, I can ask for that? Like, I'm allowed.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, you're allowed. Yes, you're allowed.
Actually, that's how I got my first raise at a retail job that I really loved when I was in high school. And I was part-time, but I think I had been there for about a year, and I heard somewhere that they had a higher hiring, like base hiring hourly wage, and I was like, is that true? And then I asked one of my coworkers, I was like, hey, I understand if I was pretty similar in age, we're both teenagers working at a retail store. I was like, hey, if this is okay with you, I got hired at this rate. Do you feel comfortable sharing like what rate you got hired at? Because maybe I haven't been communicating well enough with like management. Mm-hmm. And they shared it with me, and I was like, okay. And then I was like, how do I ask for a raise? And my uncle actually told me, you haven't gotten a raise and you've been there for a year? Oh, you gotta ask. You gotta ask. You just gotta ask. That's all you gotta do. And I was like, really? Like, I feel like that's kind of, I don't know, I'm only part-time. I know I'm young, and I have a lot of work to do in places. He's like, no, ask for a raise. You do it.
So you had an instinct. You then gathered the information. You got the information. It confirmed your instinct. Mm-hmm. And then you wondered whether you could do something about that, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Do you see what I just did there? Mm-hmm. And then you had all this other self-doubt and always going, well, am I allowed to do that? Well, I don't know if I should do that. Mm-hmm. Would that be rude? Would that be, you didn't say the word rude, but mm-hmm. Would that be tacky? Would that be,
that's what I'm finding.
You immediately question the validity of asking for mm-hmm. it.
Yeah.
So that's a very female response. Mm-hmm. And that's based on data. That's not just me talking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now here's another trick I'm going to tell you all. This is great. So I talk about Chris Voss in my book as well. He's this, so all right, so negotiation books, the general marketplace on negotiation books is extremely white, male dominated. I'm one of only about literally like 6 women authors coming out with my book. That's how male dominated it is, negotiation books. They also tend to be written for the C-suite executive, the sales and marketing manager, the attorneys, not for the everyday person. Okay, so I've read a whole lot of the negotiation books, and one of them called Never Split the Difference is by Chris Voss, and he is a white man. He is a retired FBI hostage negotiator. He was with the FBI for 30 years. Okay, just the dude he's like a secret agent. I mean, he's a ninja in what he can do. And I actually took his masterclass course on negotiation, and he had a couple of pretty cool little tips in there. And a couple of them he called mirroring and labeling. So the mirroring it's reflecting back. Okay, but here's what's cool about it. He says, and this gets back to the, well, what if I can't remember it all? What if I lose track? What if I, okay, here's a hack. If all you do is repeat back the last 1, 2, 3 words of what that person just said, it works. It totally works. And he tells this story about a colleague or a friend of his who was going to a party, a cocktail party with his wife. And he told his wife before they went to the party, he said, all I'm going to do tonight at the party is use the Chris Voss mirroring, just repeating back the 1 to 3 words. That's all I'm going to do. So he did that all night long. And at the end of the evening, all these other party guests were going up to his wife saying how fascinating her husband was. So it's really, but what I like about it is it's kind of like the training wheels. So if you feel super nervous about the reflecting back and, oh, I'm not going to get it, I'm going to just do that. You're going to be amazed at how effective just that is. So I was trying to, the noise that I had going on for myself during our practicum there was, first of all, I wanted to ask, I had so many questions. I wonder if, and I'm like,
you get it.
And then like the professor in me was like, well, Friedrich Nietzsche, and I'm like, no, don't, just don't. Reset the intent, reset. So you see, even me, and I'm like, I'm really, really good at this, really good at it. Like, could you tell I was employing a technique?
Yeah. I mean, just because I was looking for it.
Because you were looking for it.
There were times where you did catch me off guard because it just felt very natural, and it really did feel like I was being.
Yeah, but even I have to keep, I got to go through the loop. I got to keep resetting the intention because I'm like, okay, Nietzsche, and I asked that question. Oh, reset the intention. Oh, reset the intention. And then I even have this noise of, gosh, I'm the speaker here, and just my pedagogical mind is going, I really would like to demonstrate that getting it wrong and how getting it wrong is still okay. And so I was trying to think of a way to get something wrong.
Yeah.
And I tried at one point, and I can't remember sitting it. I have to look at the recording to see where I sort of tried to get it a little bit wrong, hoping that you'd be like, not quite, just so I could demonstrate, like, see, it's okay. But you didn't really go for it. You're like, yeah. So
I'm a good start.
Yeah. So yes, I still, we all have noise. And another thing that you said earlier, you talked about, canceling your noise. You're not going to cancel your noise. Mm-hmm. That's why I use the word managing. Mm-hmm. Manage your noise. Mm-hmm. You don't expect to cancel your noise. Even these superlatives, like, go out and be your awesomest self every day. Mm-hmm. Go out and be your good self every day. Like, you don't have to be your most super awesome self every single day all the time. That's a lot of pressure. You're not going to cancel your noise. That's too much pressure. Okay. Like, we want to set the bar high enough that you get over it, but low enough that it's still attainable.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that.
So, is there anything else from anyone?
We could look in the chat too.
I'm looking at the chat. I didn't see anyone typing any repetitive words.
I was expecting to be
there's one. Repetitive words: active, try, and effective. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Oh, cool.
Definitely cool.
So the word try, I wonder what you mean by, and then yes, I didn't notice actus. Yeah, I didn't notice that, but that was a repetitive word. And effective. Yeah, you did use the word effective a lot. Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
So I will often do, Jamari, I'm going to get to you in just a sec. Yeah. I will often do exactly what I did with you, and I wasn't just doing this for this seminar. I will actually say to somebody, you have used the word, toxic 6 times, and they'll be like, oh wow, and I will just name it, and then that can really kind of focus someone in too. Jamari, what's on your mind?
Oh yeah, I was just saying I noticed noise as well.
What was your noise?
Oh no, I was just like noticing when you guys were talking back and forth about how the noise was like just going on in just your daily lives and stuff, and not how to cancel it. I mean, I notice a lot of noise too when I since I'm doing my master's, I have to really focus in myself. So there's always a lot of noise going on around me. So how do I just tunnel vision? Just
manage it, not cancel it, manage it.
Yeah.
But so that gets to, I do want to ask, and Anna too, feel free to chime in, or anybody, responsibility. You did talk about responsibility. That was another repetitive. Yeah, I did notice that. And anyone else type in the chat. What was Anna, Jamari, anyone? What kind of noise were you having as an observer?
Well, I'll just say, as you asked us to take notes, and I forgot that immediately and just started listening. So that was my noise of like just engaging with the conversation and then realizing, oh wait, I was supposed to do something while I was listening. So that was hard for me to do two things at once. That was my noise.
I could share my noise too.
Yeah, the speaker can have noise.
Probably the most, I definitely usually do. The most significant one was that I hope I'm not talking too much and taking up too much time. What time is it? How much time do we have left? You know, like I'm trying to be, well, there we go again, a responsible panelist, you know? Yeah. Mm-hmm. I have a bad sense of time anyway, so that's always going to be in the back of my head, time.
Right. And again, that's okay. That's okay. Then you notice it and you reset your intention. It's okay. You're going to have noise. Notice it, reset your, it's a loop.
Yeah. And the thing I noticed is it just also tie into any conversation that I have. I hear a lot of my ideas getting validated, and I'm just like, I want to say, yeah, like, oh, I read that book. Oh, I knew that.
That's noise.
Yeah. And I want to just like be in that energy. And then I realize like that's more just me talking instead of listening.
And you know what else I notice as a listener, because I've done this so many years now, and I do the demo. Do you know that at the beginning still of every demo, I'm like, oh my God, I hope I don't screw this up. I still feel that like people are watching, they need to learn something from this. And what I notice is that as I'm listening and as I'm focusing on you, it just gets easier and easier and easier because I'm like really there, and it truly does become and it's like not even an effort anymore. Like after like the first 2 minutes, it's like I'm almost like not even trying to listen because I'm just naturally listening, and it's also because I'm like, gosh, I'm so curious. Like, where's this going? You know, like I kind of pretend, and there's another chapter on this in my book, Storytelling and Negotiation. Very, very effective tool. There's that word, effective. Storytelling, very effective tool in negotiation. I pretend I'm listening to a story, and stories are so powerful because they cross cultures and time, and they're de-escalating and they're nurturing, you know, hearkening back to being a child and listening to a story being told to you. They make people feel connected. They are easier to remember intense moments in a negotiation rather than data. They're hard to argue with. People don't tend to interrupt when you're telling a story. So when I was listening to you, Chloe, I was like, I pretend like I'm listening to a story, and that helps me focus. Just putting that spin on it, like, oh, I'm listening to a story. Where's this going?
I agree. I find myself doing that. This sounds weird, almost like I'm a robot, but I think when I realize that I'm not pausing and being as maybe sympathetic or empathetic as I could be, I think that's how I kind of ground myself in my own noise of, you know, just like human analysis, because I can be the analyzer too sometimes. And it's like, maybe I should pause that analyzing and just take a second to really consider that this is a person telling me their story, and like what they're sharing is valuable, and I want to give them inherent respect, not because of the content and like picking it apart and how that affects me or what I can do for them and all of those different little social nuances, but because they are just choosing to share the words that they do choose to share.
Right, and it's not your job to figure it out for them. It's your job to be there with them in the moment. And you know, I'm a mediator, so that's what mediators do. We will meet you where you are. That's our job. That's that. Remember the 3 non-judgmental, empathetic, and insides match, authentic. You know, insides match the outsides. That meet that person where they are.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Well, this was such a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Good.